Hello and welcome to Season 2 of ReFocus, where we talk to artists and music industry professionals about building sustainable careers as creative workers, with a focus on folk. I'm your host, Rosalind Dennett. Our guest today is Barbra Lica. She's a JUNO-nominated singer-songwriter, producer, and a seasoned act on the North American club and festival circuits. She has performed everywhere, from New York City's legendary Birdland to Toronto's Koerner Hall, headlining festivals around the world, including Festival International de Jazz de Montréal, Tokyo International Jazz Festival, Port-au-Prince International Jazz Festival, and has opened for giants like Christian McBride, Pat Metheny, and Terence Blanchard. Her 2018 album, You're Fine, marked the first introduction of folk and Americana elements to her repertoire and amassed over 6 million streams to date on Spotify. More recently, her first self-produced EP, Imposter Syndrome, garnered her 2 2024 Canadian Folk Music Award nominations in the category of Single of the Year and Solo Artist of the Year. At the 2023 Folk Music Ontario Conference, the album single The Ghost of Me took home the 2023 Ontario Folk Music Award CMRRA Song of the Year prize. Here's our conversation with Barbra Lica. Hi, Barbra. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for being here. So last time I saw you, you were holding a brand new award you had just received for the CMRRA Song of the Year at the Ontario Folk Music Awards for your song Ghost of Me. And the opening to your acceptance speech was that you were a little surprised about that. Why were you surprised?
I think that no part of me, like no cell in my body, thought there was any chance that I would win a trophy of any kind. I mean, I literally have a song that I wrote called Trophy that I wrote after making a joke that I never win anything. And then this ended up happening. So I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's my Eastern Europeanness or if it's the fact that, I've been doing jazz for so long. I mean, I feel like I've been doing folk for a long time now too, but it's sort of hard to get into the club. And I feel like, Joel Elliott's always telling people you're folk enough, but I don't think I really internalized that. So I didn't think I was folk enough. And it was cool when I won because now I'm officially folk enough, right? If you win a folk award, you're folk enough.
Can you tell us a little bit about that song and what it meant to you?
Oh man, I was like in the absolute pits of my depression. I was just ready to throw in the towel. I said, that's it. And I have so many friends in the music industry that I was like, I wish you all the best, but I'm out. I'll just be cheering you on from the sidelines. So I feel like I couldn't really process the feeling until it existed as a song. And my friend Danielle Kanibi, who's I think she won the Colleen Peterson Award before. She's one of my closest friends, and she came over and helped me kind of get this out of my system when we wrote this song together. And yeah, it's weird because now it's been a while and I haven't quit yet. But I feel like you almost have to write the song so that you can really finish figuring out what you're feeling.
Did you feel then once the song had been created, like you're like, I did it, I figured it out, I put it into the song, and now I'm able to move through that feeling?
Well, I mean, after you write the song, then all of a sudden you have this renewed feeling of wanting to perform that song and wanting to see if anybody else feels that way too. And I think before that, I sort of focused on a lot more joyful topics and lovey-dovey things and lighter things. And so I think that being on the cusp of wanting to quit even gave me the courage to say, well, what's the worst that happens? Nobody likes it and I quit. So I just put it out and had that renewed motivation to just get some stuff out and get some real feelings out and deal with wanting to quit and being sad and being upset and being insecure by putting out music that is about that.
And then what's the reaction like then been from audiences and fans when they hear the song?
People really like when we do it after, at concerts, people get really quiet, or sometimes they'll say things like, wow, which is really strange still, because no matter how many times we perform it, I always feel nervous to perform it, like, oh, this will be a real bummer. And so it's always kind of amazing how people relate to it, people in all fields, because anybody sort of doing the day-to-day hustle, no matter what it is, whether it's a job or in family, I feel like it's just a good song for tired people who are at their wits' end,
Do you draw energy from that then? I know you said like, oh, this will be a bummer, but you've made it to that other side in the sense that you're performing it now and you're on the stages, you're winning awards, you're doing tours. You obviously chose to hop back into it. Does that song feel kind of empowering?
Yeah, I mean, it's just like it's kind of been exciting to see that you can change gears and still connect with people. I always used to joke that like I'm not Barbara Lica. Everybody calls me Barbie in my real life, like everybody. So I'm always like Barbara Lica is kind of like an exaggerated version of me on my best day.
Mm-mm.
And it's been exciting to sort of take to this place where like I actually am this person and I really am particularly real on stage and I can really be me and I can really work through my issues and I can really talk about things and I don't have to sort of summon up a smile or summon up whatever. I remember some of the guys in my band telling me that who'd they go see? Was it Rose Cousins?
Mm-hmm.
And then she had done a performance where she said, look, today's like a bad day for me. It's going to be a depressing set. And she didn't feel compelled to do that thing I've done for years where it's like, well, the set has to be constructed in such a way, maybe you start high energy and then you go here and then, she just did the set she felt. And I love that, I love just do the set you feel. Every show of mine, every set list is different. Even when we were at Folk Music Ontario, the thing you're supposed to do at Folk Music Ontario is you're supposed to feature your best stuff that you can do confidently that fits in that time frame. And on one of my showcases, I just did a brand new song that we've never done as a band together because, if you're not going to make yourself feel something and be excited and you're not going to enjoy anything, then you're just giving everything away. So yeah, it was kind of, I don't even know how it went. I don't care. It was a good time.
That takes some courage and sometimes that really pays off, right? Because if you're being vulnerable with the audience by like maybe doing something a little bit out of your comfort zone, the audience wants to take that risk with you, right?
Yeah, and also like you could do everything perfectly every time and do all the things you think you're supposed to do and be frustrated that it doesn't work out. At least if you're having a good time and doing what you want, it's a win-win no matter what. And I had this experience actually back in April talking about nightmare situation, like the award where I didn't have the speech prepared, but this was worse, where I was in North Carolina and we had just done the sound check, and then I totally lost my voice. I knew it was kind of on the edge, but I think all that was left were maybe 3 notes. And we still had to do 2 shows, 2 sets, and complete total laryngitis, just gone. So I ended up having to do 2 shows where I improvised new melodies to every song on the spot, 2, 3 notes, like using just a few notes. And it was the most horrifying, like musical situation of my life.
Wow.
And I sort of I think something twisted in my brain that day too, where it was just like, we've done the worst case scenario. We've seen what happens and it was fine.
Mm-hmm.
Everything is always fine. Just have a good time, have fun. Like we're so ready, I think, in music to sacrifice our experience in pursuit of a positive experience for others.
That's so interesting. When I look back to times that I've like pushed myself to perform sick, and I'm not saying this in a way to like advocate for people doing that, like take care of yourself, do what you need to do. But I relate to that experience in that sometimes I think of times where I've performed like when I don't feel my best, but that's like my new challenge, is like you adapt and figure out a way to make it possible. And sometimes it's like that extra challenge.
I would never advocate for either, but I was there. Like I bought the flights for a 5-piece band. I paid for the visa. I really needed to get paid. This wasn't like this was like a financial situation where it had to happen. And then the lights go down. It's like, okay, this is happening. It didn't even feel real. It was surreal.
But props to your improvisational ability to make everything into like the 1-note samba,
That's what it was. It was kind of like the 3-note samba, but we changed everything changed. Like I was counting in every tune, just changing keys of everything on the spot, and the band was just kind of watching intently. I feel like we never had to listen to each other that much because we're a band that's rehearsed and played together for 10 years.
Wow.
And all of a sudden it's like, okay, what's happening? Nothing's going to be clean tonight.
Has it been the same group pretty much for 10 years?
Yeah, I mean, the bassist has switched out partway through, but even then, like, the bassist who plays with us now for the past 6 years. He's my like old university bass friend playing buddy.
That's great. How do you kind of maintain that relationship then with your bandmates? Is that like a conscious relationship that you kind of tend to, or?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the secret to these things for me is that no matter how close we become as friends, like we message each other almost every day, and we have a great time getting along. We hang out after gigs, and I think no matter what happens as a band leader, I have to never take advantage of them. I think it's very easy to say, well, we're friends. Can you do this favor? No matter what it is, I respect them as professional working musicians. And they know that they're going to get, a union fee. If somebody has to struggle and it's my gig and I'm doing these things, if somebody has to lose money, it's going to be me. I'm not going to divide it amongst them. And I always pay them for everything. And I think if you keep that professionalism, where it's like no matter how much we become friends, that's not going to cost you. I'm not going to blur the lines. I think that's kept us getting along all these years, because they know now after 10 years, I'm always going to respect them professionally.
Yeah, I feel like that's a part of how I first came to know you too, was through your work, or maybe it wasn't even work, just like advocacy that you've done about like musicians' rights and union related kind of work stuff. Is that something you've always been passionate about?
Yeah, I mean, I really believe in the value of music and the value that musicians bring. And I think, the most powerful thing that the industry can do to musicians is convince them that they have no value. And people always say that, there's no money in music. There is money in music, but there's a lot of gatekeepers and people interrupting the downward flow
Mm.
of that money. And musicians are always quick to play for free or do favors. And I kind of want to be, I want to be an example of the world I believe in. Like, it would be really great if I could get my guys to just come and do a thing for free for me. That'd be really great for me. And a lot of the time I can't afford it, but it doesn't matter, because if I want a service, I have to pay for it. And I just try to the best of my ability to be fair, and also to advocate for fair circumstances. Like in my orchestra, I hired somebody so that if somebody had an issue, they could go to somebody else and anonymously put in grievances or whatever, that somebody could fight me. I remember we were in the middle of a sound check right outside Ottawa, actually. And the steward, he started arguing with me that my sound check was going too long, and that it was going to run into their dinner time. And it was funny because like I loved it. It was such a I want to say delicious moment because on one hand, like me was like, no, I really want to sound check this. I really want to get it right. But then I was so happy that somebody was there saying, you can't do that. These guys need to have their dinner. And I think that's really important to have. Like, it's really important to advocate for them to have that calm time, them to have their meal, them to have, it's really important to be treated fairly.
Yeah. Otherwise, you don't want them going into the gig hangry. That's
No.
not good for anyone.
And I remember like the steward was apologizing to me after. It's like, sorry, Barbie, that like I had to fight back there. I'm like, no, man, like it's exactly what you're there for. Like, that's a battle I was supposed to lose. It's great.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I wish that existed in every band, because then also you don't have that resentment, right? Like there isn't that resentment towards the individual musician who's speaking up for themselves. Like, oh, you're not a team player because you're trying to duck out early to fill your needs,
Exactly. Like, your needs matter. And I think as musicians, we're so quick to say like, well, I'll just take one for the team, or I'll be a team player, this or that. But it's still a workplace, and you still have needs, and you're still human, and you're still important, and you still offer a service. As a sideman, your band leader owes you that. As a leader, the presenter owes you that. It's crazy how much I run into even presenters that are fighting you over whether or not they give you dinner and a room. Like, if my friend came over from Vancouver, I don't even know where I'd put them. I'd give them my room and offer them dinner. Like, it's just basic hospitality and manners. And I really believe that musicians need to stand together and demand that they deserve things. We deserve things. I'm not saying you have to join the union, but I believe in a unified mentality, you know?
And it's like when we're sticking up for each other too, and when there's that kind of solidarity, stuff can happen. Change can actually be made, I think.
I mean, look at the Hollywood writers' strike. I would love it.
Yeah.
I'd love if musicians did that, but they're scared. People are scared. Nobody wants to be sort of the poster child of standing up and complaining and being difficult. And
Yeah.
maybe as the ghost of me, uh,
Mm.
I just don't. I'm just not scared, and I just don't care. Like, what is it we're all protecting? What are we fighting for? And I feel for the presenters too, because I think there's less money than there's ever been in the arts. And you see festivals falling like flies, and they don't necessarily have the money to pay enough or to do enough. But I also think on the other side of artists, we shouldn't be accepting low fees. We shouldn't be accepting fees where we lose money, where it pays less than the flight. We're depending on granting systems, which slowly have less money too. I think the factor success rate last session was 8% or something. I wasn't part of it, but I saw it go out. And I know Canadian Heritage was speaking a little bit about that at Folk Music Ontario, about how artists are going to be needing to find other methods of funding. And I do believe that maybe some of the events should shrink in scope and focus on whatever you do present is paid and accommodated fairly.
That's such an interesting point of conversation, because it is scary when you see like the overall funding level, like just kind of across the board drop. And then it can kind of send people in this scarcity kind of mentality. I think that's there anyways, kind of that competitiveness between organizations, industry, companies, musicians, that kind of exists throughout each of those levels. But there has to be some sort of, there's like a breaking point or some sort of, like something has to change. And when we get to a little point where the industry is getting really stressed, usually there's something like bizarrely catastrophic that, it's a pandemic. Now we have to figure something new out. There's streaming. We have to figure something new out, and if live music is it's already been kind of stressed to the max with the pandemic. And now we're finding that it's still feeling that stress. So there's like gotta be, like, I don't know. Can you fix the music industry, Barbara? What do you suggest? Do you have thoughts on like any ways that we can make things more sustainable?
Oh man, I mean it's hard, right? It's little things here and there. I mean, I'm always saying that on the granting level, I think that public funding to presenters should come with the caveat that there are minimums on what the actual hired artists are spent. And I've been on panels where I've seen that there is some loose inquiry on like, how are you basing your funding, your pay structures? But I don't know how seriously that quick question is taken or how much it's lined up with the budgets to see what are the actual numbers here. And especially like you have a lot of the granting programs saying, well, you have to prioritize marginalized artists, which is great. But how is that money lining up with those artists? Like, are you just hiring certain artists so that you could put them in the byline, or are you actually both paying those artists and creating a meaningful platform?
Yeah, that's there was an artist who I absolutely love, but I don't want to like say who it is because I don't know if they're like still planning to do this or not. But they wanted to do a study of, basically they were headlining festivals, playing on the main stage of festivals as a solo female artist, and they started asking male counterparts who were doing the same act kind of thing, so what are you getting paid for this gig? And found out that many times male counterparts who were even like not playing as prestigious of a slot on the main stage were getting paid way more. So she wanted to start, I think she called it, I'll show you mine if you show me yours, which is cheeky, but just like a way either to get that information through the festivals or through the musicians to make sure that people were being paid fairly, that there wasn't like a huge wage gap, a gender gap there.
I mean, that's one thing that I actually appreciate too about Folk Music Ontario, is that I feel like there was a lot of effort. First of all, anything I was asked to do in Folk Music Ontario as part of the Developing Artist Program was paid. And I felt there's also a lot of effort, I think, to bring value to artists. A lot of it is very artist centric. The panels that were selected, the things, artists were paying registration fees, but I feel like there was a value offered. Whereas a lot of showcase conferences are primarily geared towards presenters and people on the industry side. And if anything, artist showcases are the draw, but those artists are still asked to pay registration fees. I just feel like we should be demanding a little bit more. There should be a minimum. And I think that if events, whether it's festivals or conferences, can't offer that, they should shrink. Everybody wants to have like a big, huge event. We want to go over 3 days or go over a weekend. Maybe make it 1 day, but pay properly. Maybe it's smaller, but it's really, there's no dark side to it.
Yeah. I mean, that would be my solution in the way that I think about it. That's like the thing that makes the most sense to me is like, not that we should have less festivals or less labels or less conferences, but more and smaller, like let them be like a reasonable, sustainable size. So you don't feel like you have to pay a headliner $100,000 to come play your festival. Otherwise we won't get 70,000 people over the weekend. Like what if your goal is instead like 20,000 people and you pay everybody like a reasonable, fair wage without, having to rely on that, giant draw that takes up the majority of the artistic budget,
And also building real platforms for people in the sense that if you are paying that $100,000 headliner, have them actually collaborate with local artists or emerging artists. Like have them create something that's unique to your festival and that ends up building real value for those other artists.
Yeah, that's an amazing idea.
Like something a little bit more, which I think that some folk festivals do to a degree, where they have like writers in the round or something.
Well, even it was like the idea of the festival workshop is, in my mind, one of the most effective. And oh gosh, I mean, I can go on about the Canadian festival like workshop stages and stuff. I think it's so brilliant because you get to say like I played on the same stage as Valerie June and Dawes and like the Warren Treaty. I got to jam with them, like just like ridiculous opportunities for artists to get to play with some of their heroes and like get the opportunity to, and then you also, once you start playing with them, now you have had a conversation. So like now on stage, even if that's the first time I've ever met, after the performance, I'm like chatting with Valerie and I'm like, that was so fun. That was so great. Like, yeah, next time you come through Winnipeg, let's hang. And, there's, now I've built a relationship with somebody that is like really influential and that I respect. And it's very cool. It's a lot of value.
And like commissions, like you could have big artists come in and do commissions where they collaborate artistically with other artists. But I mean, aside from all of that like all those ideas are sort of ideas I've had for a long time within the scope of the traditional artist hustle, which is, go to conferences, showcase, try to get tours, apply for the grants, go on the tours. And I've always, asked for mentorship. I'm always big on asking, like, what do you think? What do you think? What do you think? How can we make this lucrative? How can we? And I feel like the most interesting advice I got very recently was from a friend who works in the commercial field, who's sort of looking at a lot of what I do from a strictly like kind of business standpoint. And looking through at it said like, well, none of this makes sense. And he said, if you do the same thing, and I don't think he meant for this line to be as impactful as it was, but it's been breaking my brain. Like, if you do the same thing as everybody else, how do you expect to stand out? And that's what we're doing. Like, we all have this expectation that we'll always be visible, and we always need to tour so that we'll be visible, and we need to go to the conferences, and we need to post all the time. We need to do these things. And then I'm looking at somebody like, say, Saya Gray, who barely ever posts anything except for maybe the odd, she's really into pole dancing. Like very, very little posting, can't really tell where she's touring or what's happening, but she's really focusing on just making great content, musical content or video content. Like what if we, and I'm just hypothesizing here because I think this is the way I want to go. What if we take a step back, stop being in the rat race or the hustle and this high pressure thing that we feel like we need to do, again, sacrificing the self for what we believe the audience needs or however we feel we need to stay relevant, and just focus on making stuff, like good stuff that speaks to you, that you like making, and just keep making stuff. And I see like in the comedy world, there's Netflix specials from comedians who haven't really toured at all, but have entirely built just online comedy specials that have moved directly from that to selling out clubs in New York. If you just take a step back and get away from that pressure to do what you think you have to do and what you're supposed to do, and just make good content. I mean, think about it. Like a factor grant is what? $10,000 for just the recording component. And in order to get that $10,000, you need to spend $13,000. So it's $3,000 out of pocket plus all the time, and time is money because our time has value. All the time you spent building that grant, all the time you're going to spend doing the final reports and the two-step audits and the essays you're going to write for every component to get every piece of support material, which will also be 75% funded. Forget all that time. Take those thousands of dollars and make some music.
I 100% agree with what you said. And I just think it can be personalized for every single person in a completely different way. It's like about auditing what makes you happy and sparks creativity and like where you sit in the artistic process, because somebody might also have the exact opposite. Speaking for myself here, I have like when I think about as with my artist hat on, I love playing. I love playing live. I love playing festivals. That's what gets me going. Some people are writing songs and you're like, are you really like into writing songs? Or do you just feel like you need to write songs? Because I've felt like that where there's like a pressure for me that doesn't come naturally to like write songs and then record my own songs. But that means that like maybe I don't have to do that. Maybe that side of it isn't the part that brings me joy, and it's the live performance, and that's where I can focus.
Exactly. And there's such a stigma around finding like conventional forms of funding, like a part-time or full-time job. That job you're getting probably ends up being less time out of your day than what I know for me for years has been like, 7 a.m. to 2 a.m., and weekends don't exist. And just that constant hustle. And, if you take a day off, you feel like you're being lazy that day. It's a miserable feeling. Like, what if we just found ways to fund specifically the one thing or the two things that bring us joy? Like, joy is important. And if you retain joy, you're going to keep making stuff that you like, that is sustainable. I think joy is what makes things sustainable. Like it's why no matter how, nutso my 2-year-old is running around the place and doing things that normally I would have been sweating buckets, feels like the easiest thing in the world because I love him and I love his face. And so it's sustainable because there's joy. And I think we just lose that. And I think if we prioritize that and we make stuff we're proud of, maybe it's a bit of a domino effect. Maybe value comes from there. I don't know. I just feel like the industry and like all the sort of rhetoric we hear all the time, like, oh, if you're a musician, you got to wear every hat. You got to do this and that. And we just hear these things and we accept these things. And there's a bit of a cult around it. Like, why does making music or art have to be anything but what you say it is? And so, like, I love writing and I love recording, and that's my happy place. And so I just kind of want to do that. And I want to figure out ways to make that lucrative, or else find other things that help fund that instead of sitting and writing essays and doing the thing and going through the cycle. It's exhausting. And I'm ready to just break out of it.
Do you think that there's a way that like collectively we can do something? Like, is it up to the individual or is it up to the collective to make a difference?
I mean, I think unfortunately, there's so many things I love to change about the industry, but I do think that there's so much interference in that flow. There's so many gatekeepers that it is a little bit overbroken, and we don't necessarily have even the legal power. I love this utopian world where we all stand together and do things. And I think that it's still important to fight every small battle. Like I know I have sometimes to my own detriment. But I think ultimately we all have to look within ourselves to say, what do I have to do to feel like I have value? Maybe you have to build that value system for yourself first and then go about enforcing it. I don't know. it feels overwhelming to tackle the industry as a whole. Like you were talking about transparency before. I think transparency should be an absolute given. I think everybody should stop posturing. I feel like I tell anybody who asks me what my fees are. And I ask everybody their fees, even if it makes them uncomfortable. I remember going to a showcase conference one time, and there was a sort of panel of agents that I walked in on, and I had said something about that, like, wouldn't it be great, even for you guys, if we just posted fees across the board so that everybody could call the MFN card, and I remember one agent said, that sounds all, did the jazz hands. So it was like, that sounds all hunky-dory, but my clients, don't want people to know if they play somewhere for free.
Mm-hmm.
And at that point, like the conversation is over for me, because it's like, why are you getting your artist an unpaid gig? And why are we encouraging this system? And why shouldn't that be told? How do you convince all these artists to stand together and stop doing these things? Like, unfortunately, this system is basically just moving towards a place where the only people who can afford to do it are either independently wealthy or, truly doing it on the side. Like the age of, the full-time middle class musician is dying, and that top tier of musician is part of an industry that's probably taking the majority of the money. I've been going into a lot of the schools and trying to do little workshops on DIY business and stuff, and sort of trying to get at the younger generation of people to sort of, from the beginning as much as I can, say, guys, get reasonable fees, value yourself, do this. But I think that more than anything is we all just need to decide that we actually have value. If we didn't, why would anybody even want us there?
Oh, exactly. Like somebody else is profiting off of that value. It's not that you don't have value. It's just that somebody else is profiting off of your value.
Oh yeah. I would love to have like a strike where all music is just shut down for even one day. Like no cabs, no gyms, no anywhere. Just like see people exist with that silence and then tell us that we don't offer a real service. I mean, there's actually scientific studies saying that people work out better with music. It's very strange that we've all been convinced we're not worth anything, which is a really great way to get us for cheap. It's ingenious. Like part of me really respects, like, tip of the hat to you. I really respect that. That's a real long game that was played, and it's really effective. And like my friend Joel always likes to say, like, no matter how crappy it gets, unfortunately, it's still the best job on the planet. Like we love it so much, and we've let that turn it into a ridiculous job. I mean, can you imagine any other job where somebody's like, all right, okay, we're going to hire you. You can play my event, but instead of paying you, we're going to give you this letter that says we intend to have you. And you know what? You could take that letter and you can write some essays to the government, and they'll possibly, maybe pay you. But we need to know by this day, because we're going to make our programs. So we really need to know by this day. And you might not get the money, but look, you're going to have a great time. You love this, right? You love this. Like, can you imagine any other job where they paid you in a letter for money, maybe if you write an essay? It's so unethical. And yet it's so, like, the number of excited musicians who are like, Barb, I got 8 letters. It's like some kind of alternate universe where, I don't know, I just feel like I'm waking up from this stuff and like, what are we doing? I knew it was bad, but then even like the things I didn't want to admit that I've been participating in for so long, like, why am I asking for letters? How about just like a fee that would pay enough? Any other job, even just that, where it's like, okay, hey, Roz, I'm going to pay you to come over to Vancouver Island. And, everybody uses the plumber or whatever, fix my HVAC system. And I'm going to pay you enough to fix the HVAC system, but you got to cover the flight and the hotel room.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a bum deal. And I think that there's a difference between the paying huge fees and like a living wage. I think that there is like a living wage that is very reasonable if you're a presenter or whatever thing is. If it's like, if there's a general, oh man, I'm getting real calmy now. But if there's like a baseline, I mean, I could get even more that like, what if the government had like a minimum wage for artists? Like,
that's where I think like the union is useful. Like, even if you don't join, there are guides to what, look at your local and look at even if you're not in it, just email them, say, hey, can I have and if you look in your local, like that's what they think you should get paid for however many hours.
That's what they think the minimum
The
should
minimum,
be.
the minimum.
Very minimum.
And on top of that, like you need to be considering, yes, your travel. If your agent's going to take anything, you need to consider hospitality costs. If you're a leader, you're supposed to be getting double. If you're playing any doubles and, dragging some more instruments with you, that's supposed to be, 50,
Cartage.
25, 10 cartage, right? There are guidelines to what your basic hospitality should be, how much each meal should cost if they're not providing it. Like you add all that stuff up. So, and that's the thing, like, a lot of presenters will say, we're paying people union. Well, like, are you paying the leader double? Like,
health and welfare?
Are you paying health and welfare? Are you paying travel stipends based on how far it is? Because there are guides to that. Like if something is outside of your region, you're supposed to be getting a travel stipend.
I think that health and welfare sometimes like it gets ignored, especially in Canada, because we're like, well, we have healthcare. It's like, no, but it's health and welfare. Like there's like, we still have to go to the dentist and,
So true. And I'm not even like, I'm trying to pay fairly and I'm not giving my band enough to cover all of those amounts. I'm doing my best, but it is just crazy how, over the years, the fee offers get lower and the grant asks have to be higher. And it's like, why am I doing this? And then somebody's doing that and getting these offers or getting these letters. And you have other artists looking at them through Instagram being like, oh, it's amazing. You're touring, you're doing all this stuff. I'm sorry, but like I've gone and messaged a bunch of musicians who I consider much more successful than me. And all of them will say, oh yeah, when I tour, I lose money.
It boils down to sustainability, right? Because the system must be broken if you have a public that is willing to pay a ticket price or they're willing to like invest in music and that money isn't going to either because I know that festivals and presenters are losing money too. So if like somehow presenters, they don't have enough money and the musicians don't have enough money, but we know people are willing to spend money, then like where is it going? Like what is
it goes to the middleman. Like I mean, most major labels, their boilerplate contract will be like 75% of your master. Like every manager takes 15 to 20%, every agent takes 15 to 20%. And a lot of them are very helpful. I don't want to crap on the entire thing, but there's something to be said for DIY and retaining your rights and retaining everything if you can, and not necessarily looking at getting a label or getting a manager as a sign of success. And then people are like, well, I can't manage all this workload and I can't. And then there's that other line like, well, when you get enough of a workload, that's when they'll come and help. You mean like that's when they'll come and exploit you? I feel like if we can scale our own businesses down to what brings us the most joy and what's sustainable, put a value on that and hold on to it. I mean, there's so many arguments on this. Like, would you rather have 100% of nothing? but honestly, I can't even say that without feeling like somebody's dad. Like, it's a rough puzzle. And if somebody really wanted to create a coalition and do something and change something, like I'd be first there. But I do wonder if it starts at the level of public funding, if it even exists, in the way that we regulate the funding that's given to festivals and presenters. And again, saying this with the full understanding that the festivals are struggling so much too. And I see that, but there has to be some kind of conversation about sustainability on both sides. And, maybe at some point I thought that maybe unionizing the corporate side of the business, like the wedding industry and all these things do have very healthy fees. You get a lot more freelance musicians thinking that way. I have many thoughts and feelings, but since I feel somehow powerless to change the industry at large, all I can do is prioritize my own experience and my own joy. And again, I think having a kid has really helped that because I know what joy looks and feels like for me. One of my favorite moments was when Cody Hutchinson, he's the Jazz YYC festival AD, he was out in Europe at this conference there, and he was talking about how he had just debuted this Canadian orchestra project. And it was a dream of his. Like, he'd always dreamed of having this orchestral project, and it was so much work, and he'd realized it. And then he goes home, and there's this little girl like jumping on him saying, "Can I show you the dance that I did, that I learned?" And he's like looking at his daughter dancing, and he's like, oh crap, like, is this better?
Mhm.
And sometimes like we need that perspective to say, like, joy does exist, and it's important. And if you've been chasing it in music and not finding it, then you might be doing yourself a disservice. And also you might be defining yourself too much on the perspectives of this broken industry.
Yeah, I think on one of the first episodes we did of this show, I talked about like maybe just like the other side of that, where I was going to a gig or coming home from a gig and then like immediately got thrown up on. Where I was like feeling like on top of the world and was like, yeah, I just did this big thing and like I'm so, and then just like got a whole lot of barf thrown onto me from my child. So maybe that's a great analogy, because it's like, is this thing that gives me the most joy also shits on me all the time? And maybe that's what the music industry is like.
Yeah, it's true. It's true.
Oh gosh, I love it. It's been so cool to get to chat with each other. And I think your perspective's really, really valuable and poignant. And yeah, thank you for advocating for artists and what they do. And it's just really important work and really important words that you shared. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I hope people feel hopeful and not depressed from what I've said.
Yeah. Do you have a parting word of hope for the folks?
Yeah, I feel like as an artist, only you can decide what happiness and sustainability within the music industry is. Only you can decide, only you know, and it's important to listen to your voice and value your work.
Beautiful. Before we go though, can you tell us a little bit about some of the things you have coming up? I know you just released a Christmas single,
It's Christmas
album?
single. It's Christmas
single. Tell us about it.
It's called On Christmas Eve, and it's my family. We always celebrated on Christmas Eve instead of Christmas, because in my need to have immediate gratification, I tried to make them open presents at midnight. The story is quite overblown. Anyway, everybody got tired of waiting till midnight. So we have this tradition of just doing Christmas on Christmas Eve and getting it over with. But I sort of made this song about all the magical anticipation of Christmas Eve. And it's out everywhere, and I'll be performing it live on December 15th at the Jazz Room, so people can hurry and get tickets to that. And then after that, we'll be on the road to Alaska throughout most of March. So if anybody listening is from there or otherwise is able to grab a sleigh and a reindeer, please fly on over.
Tell your Alaskan friends,
Yeah.
Check it out. Well, thank you so much, Barbra. This has been such a great conversation. Safe travels out there.
Right. Thank you.
That's all for this episode, friends. The ReFolKus podcast is brought to you by Folk Music Ontario. Find out more by heading to folkmusicontario.org/ReFolKus. That's ReFolKus. The podcast is produced by Kayla Nizon and Rosalind Dennett and mixed by Jordan Moore at the Pod Cabin. The opening theme is by King Cardiac and the artwork is by Jamie Karn. Please give us a download, a like, subscribe, rate, and review to let us know you're listening. Until next time, keep playing that folky music.